Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Inavate APAC discussion panel. We will be talking about the deal with distribution, and I have two really prominent distributors on the panel today. Most of you should know who they are, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves anyway.
Sure, thanks, H. Michael BROADBENT, Managing Director for MIDWICH APAC. That's all you need to know?
Yep.
Okay.
And Graham Evans, CEO of AVT Asia Pacific.
Let's start off by doing kind of like a recap of what's been happening in Australian distribution over the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of upheaval, a lot of disruption, manufacturers going direct, and obviously brands jumping ship, and that having a follow-on effect, kind of like musical chairs. We're out of it now, but I'd like to hear your thoughts about what the impact of that has been and whether we're now heading into a nice period of stability.
I'll have a go. So I'd debate that we're out of it. I think there's a lot more market consolidation to happen, and there's been movement at the chessboards. Australia and New Zealand typically for electronics is 2% of the global market, and varying AVIXA reports will suggest how the region's going compared to the globe. I was on a panel yesterday with Dave Labuscus from AVIXA, and respecting regional idiosyncrasies. I think we're far from done, and there's a lot more consolidation yet to happen. There's performance pressure on a lot of manufacturers. Everyone that used to just do audio now does video control, and some of them do lighting and vice versa. And I think there'll be mergers, acquisitions, consolidations, and sadly probably a few failures.
100% agree. I think the musical chairs will continue. Yes, there'll be consolidation through mergers, acquisitions, and obviously MIDWICH play a part in that. But I think the reality is that we're all under pressure to perform, whether you're the vendor, the distributor, or the manufacturer, or whatever. And wherever you're under that pressure, you will continue to look for your best go-to-market. Sometimes that might be direct, sometimes that might be through distribution. So, and if you're not happy with your distribution, you might try for a different one, focus on a different vertical. So I really think that the musical chairs will continue.
And what does this consolidation look like? Is it just behemoths emerging in the market when it comes to distribution, or is it more like a fleshing out of your product portfolios and your offerings?
I think there's, as long as you're adding value to the supply chain, I think there's opportunity for both behemoths, as you put them, and also for players that play in the niche market. Depending on what value you're adding, whether it's volume, whether it's logistics, whether it's training, whether it's focused verticals, I think there is still an opportunity for both niche and behemoths.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. We're working with some people who are very, very good at high volume, low margin, big warehouse full of inventory and good on logistics. And that's not our value add. We've got very deep technical expertise, field service capability, training, and we have to have a different margin stack on that basis. So as some of the technology platforms get commoditized, as the price points drop significantly, you have to constantly review which platforms via which channels and where we have sustained relevance and value add and where we aren't fit for purpose. And I think you'll have those different capabilities and specialties by business model and commercial capability, and then that will align and overlay with the technology platform and the vertical markets they serve.
Let's jump on to the actual products that you guys value add to, and we'll start with hardware. The convergence with IT has meant that a lot of products are now beginning to look very similar. Sure, you can have a little bit extra on top of that, something that's customizable, but if, for example, if we just take encoders and decoders for video on IP, there's the change in the compression algorithm, but other than that, they're functionally very similar products. And if we just look at the IT industry, right, where products were standardized and offerings are very, very, very similar to each other with maybe a 0.1%, 0.2% difference. Do you see that happening in our industry? And if so, what does that mean for distributors like yourselves?
Me first. If you take the IT world, I don't know if there's any, apart from two different processes, they're all using the same processes. In AV, if there's a good process or a good technology, then they're all adopting it, whether that be at a platform or whether that be at a software or at a hardware level. I think it's what you do with it. And again, if you're trying to add value or trying to provide your product for a certain vertical or for a certain use, then I think that's where the value add or where the differentiator is. I think there's always opportunity to differentiate, and I don't see any. I don't find the AV IT thing scary. I know you had a session here yesterday that we're all going to die. I don't see that. I just see there's opportunity.
I guess the analogy I draw is the platform conversation with IT. So we deal with a lot of, as Michael does, a lot of end users who are a Cisco house, a Microsoft house, a HP house, a Dell, whatever their IT platforms are. And those decisions tend to be minimum 5 to 10, maybe up to multiple decade decisions as a platform play. And where AV has been, universities in Australia, for example, have been an AMX house or a Crestron house or an Extron house, and arguably the AV's been in there as a platform. And as software comes out and disrupts some of those established platforms in our space, that's probably the analogy from IT to AV is there's nothing, why is someone a Cisco versus a HP versus a Alcatel or some other platform? It's been the same with telephony for a long time, same with software and hardware codecs in conferencing. People choose a platform and go with it. I think to a large extent the core networked AV example has been hardware. In the future, I'd suggest there's a large software, there's a lot more algorithm capability in software that has the potential to eat into what has been very much a lucrative hardware play. So, understanding which platforms end users, consultants, integrators and distributors are going to back is going to be dictated largely by their roadmap, where they're going. And, I see banks, government agencies, universities are all looking to standardise, simplify, because where they had bespoke rooms that we were both involved in 30 years ago, and they had a few of them, they've now got hundreds or thousands of them. And you've got to bring scale to that, and you've got to be compatible with and integrated to their IT platform choice, or you'll have questionable relevance.
I kind of agree, but I disagree from the relevance. I think in our view, the IT world will still look after their servers and their networks and the distribution on their network, but we still have relevance in hardware because you still need cameras, you still need display, you still need audio, whether it's a digital signage for a retailer or it's a classroom at a university level. I find it, my view is that we find it easier or better to add value to hardware as opposed to, I find it really difficult to add value to software, particularly year 2 or year 3. But that's just our view.
And we're a little different to that, so and that's what makes the world go round. We look at our Harman audio range, so JBL speakers and Crown amplifiers and AKG microphones are unlikely to be codified anytime soon. So we still have very much a strong and strong future in that hardware that can't be codified. But our new value add and differentiation layer and stickiness to the end client, where we're bringing insights, bringing them data-driven information, and bringing them monitoring and management, is all in the software play. So our strategy has gone from a 32-year hardware distribution competency to a software-driven but hardware distribution hybrid model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the part I'd like to delve in further. Is we have a wealth of information on how to do distribution with hardware, and now software is entering into the mix. What does that mean for value add distribution, right? What's the model? Because we can look at how the consumer industry is doing it, right? It's a completely, no one owns anything anymore. You get a subscription and you have the premium subscriptions, and you have that tiered subscription model. Is that going to translate into AV, or do you think that we're going to have to do something completely different?
Yeah, certainly the models and the brands we represent have tiered subscription. So there is, and there has to be. It's a different commercial construct with software to hardware. There's not a big lumpy multi-million-dollar sale at the outset. It is like O365 and Zoom and all these other software platforms, much more consumption-based. So the budgeting's different. The remuneration model for your staff is different. The procurement process for your end customer through the integrator to ourselves as the distributor is different. But that's not foreign to the folks that have come from that world, and we deliberately brought on some executive talent and board capability who'd come from software, understand that construct, and can help us take AVT and AV industry on that journey.
Whereas our model is different. Our model is focused on hardware. Yes, most of our products have capabilities on the network. They do need firmware, they do need software, they do need an interface. And we're happy to supply that, but it's not our focus. Our strategy is still based around AV technology in any form, and it's typically has to have some sort of, or does have some sort of hardware attached. Even some of our wireless collaboration devices, cableless, still sits on a NUC or sits on a pod. So it still is hardware.
And I know that both MIDWICH and AVT have taken their unique approaches to distribution to the region now. We're both heading out from Australia and looking at the bigger picture, and you're looking at Asia Pacific. Could you kind of elaborate on what you saw missing in the market that you felt that your value add approach could bring to clients all across?
Well, for us, it's a model that's worked in the UK, it's a model that's worked throughout continental Europe, and it's a model that's worked throughout Australia and New Zealand. And we did feel that there is an opportunity as the Southeast Asian market matures, that there is an opportunity for the supply chain to also mature. So, it's very similar to Australia maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where the vendor was selling direct. Not so much now. When you can add value, the minute we stop adding value as distributors in the supply chain, then we have issues. Then we become irrelevant. But we think the opportunity now, as that SEA market matures even further, and I'm not talking about Singapore. I'm more talking about some of the emerging markets. We think there's an opportunity to get in there reasonably early and take some of the opportunity
That really presented from the vendors that we're representing with software and some of our new platforms, where the nature of what we're distributing doesn't require thousands of square metres of warehouse and inventory. It's typically more license and lower cost appliances, and the market seems ready for it. So we had early engagement in our discovery process before we opened with consultants, integrators and end users up there, and there was appetite to adopt early and not wait for perhaps some of the traditional vendors to come out with new platforms. and they were ready to go, and the evidence is there. The proof's in the pudding that the market's ripe, and the team's building up there. We've got more technical and sales capability up there, more leadership up there, and Asia. You can't describe until you peel back the onion to every region, every country, because there's so many idiosyncrasies. And what we have learnt really quickly on the hardware side, which I'm sure we share, Michael, is the certification for distributing products in countries varies immensely. It's expensive. There's a lot of lot of preparation to make sure you haven't got ahead of yourself.
Yep.
With representing brands and signing agreements and ordering stock before you know you're allowed to sell it. And the Japanese and their tolerances for error and risk are very low.
Yep.
And in India, hardware certifications are quite expensive, and that can take a little while. So lots of learning. We're a startup, and I think I suspect for both of us, but Michael share his views. There's a great excitement in our business to have the diversity of 32 years of history, some new software and hardware platforms, obviously the depth of investment in audio, but also to learn from a startup in Asia. What are they doing up there differently, and how are they being successful? Because they don't distribute all the brands that have brought in the revenue for AVT in Australia and New Zealand for the last 30 years. They're a startup. And that brings a new energy and agility that I'm sure our Australian team members are energised by.
Yeah.
I agree with the compliance thing. I think one of the biggest learnings we've had is that you treat Europe as Europe, and there's many countries. From an Australian New Zealand point of view, we've got a vast land which is made up of states.
Yep.
You go to an area like Southeast Asia, which is a similar sort of vast land made of different countries. And each country has their own economics, their own compliance, their own rules, their own standards. So that's certainly been a massive learning curve for us. And each one transacts different as well. So it is a learning curve, but we still believe as it matures, and as the opportunity broadens, that there is relevance, and we can add some value.
And now that you have a basis for comparison, do you feel that price competition is a bit more cutthroat out in Asia Pacific as compared to Australia?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How are you liking that?
Cost of business is probably higher than we thought as well. Cost of labour has been the interesting one. So not just for our workforce, but also for the integrators' workforce. So when the cost of labour is quite low or lower than we're used to, apart from Singapore and Hong Kong, but in other territories, the only way to compete is on product and on marginal product. So we were aware of it. We probably weren't as aware of the extent of it and how tough and cutthroat it is. But with our model too, we're focused 100% on the channel. We act on behalf of the vendors, so we sell everything through the channel, and which I think some of the channel is starting to understand and get, and starting to trust us with that. So, but certainly margin and the ability to contest is very much more price driven than what we've seen in normal European and Australian New Zealand markets, for sure.
Yeah, one other variable that we see in Asia, and it was testament at Infocom Asia in Bangkok, where we last had an interview up there. There's a lot more integrators wearing distribution hats. There's a lot more people with blurred lines, I guess, around that supply chain role, where I think Australia has got to a point where that was a feature several years ago, and there's now a lot more clear delineation. Asia seems to still have a lot of that. So coming in as a distributor, we have to have that VA in front of the D and value add, and reiterate that we're not a threat. We do sell through channel. We're not going to be selling directly, because that's something that they're familiar with. And if you don't reiterate that you are 100% committed to selling through channel, there is question marks, and that'll take longer for them to accept you and for us to be ingratiated with them early, which is important.
Question would be about how everyone's trying to build out a portfolio that's complete. It's the entire solution, right? Like if you want to do an audio system, you've got to have all the things in the chain. If you want to do video, you've got to have all the components in the chain. And distributors are set up very similarly. So can we see network switches on your product portfolio anytime soon? Because if we're all headed towards AV and IT convergence, integrators need that.
Yeah, one of the value adds for us is to provide a solution, right?
Yeah.
And the CEO, CIO of News Network once said to me, I want one throat to choke. And to me, that resonated. They want someone to take ownership and not do the whole someone else's problem. So for us, we have to provide a solution. And if that means networks, if that means switches and routers, then potentially, yeah, it could be more tactical rather than strategic. But I think the day will come when we will be selling networks.
We currently have Cisco switches, HP servers, and Intel NUCs in our price list, so that's not a new thing. It's more of a continuum, and we are trying to not force can solutions down the throats of our channel, but bring innovation and bring the ecosystem story so they can take that where it's relevant into applications, verticals, and client environments. So, we launched 2 new products here at the show. They've both got cloud management capability. Again, there's an annuity component and a support license piece. We've got to familiarise everyone in the supply chain with that new way of consumption. But yeah, the IT buyer is more familiar with that than the AV buyer historically. And we used to sell equipment that had arguably a 7-year, life. Some took it to 17. Now, what's a server life? Typically, it's a 3-year-ish sort of investment, and the technology stack that sits on that is where we're trying to bring more value and add some secret sauce. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't see us selling switches and routers to the IT channel. I see it's incumbent of us to, if we're going to sell something that sits on the network, we have to prove and understand that it actually will work. And that's probably where we will have to supply switches and routers, but within an AV environment or within an AV solution.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, H. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, H.